Good afternoon. I'm Arlie Powell, Petals from the past. Jason, my son, and I have and manage this operation here in the Jemison area. And today we're going to present some additional information that may be of interest to those of you who enjoy blackberries. We're going to show some training aspects, some tying, and how we work a trellis system that makes it easy for you to harvest fruit the following year when you're ready to enjoy very good blackberries. Today I'm going to show you some of the highlights of the different stages, as we call it, on developing what we call a TPUPS system of training with blackberries. Every plant in the row that we're in right here, they vary. They're not all together. So as you work on training blackberries, you do it based on what's in front of you. For example, this is a small plant. Notice, unlike the one here, which is developed quite nicely with branches, the objective of our work here is to fill this wire at 60 inches of height and this wire at 36 inches of height, all the way so that we have a canopy system covering the wire. When you do that, the chances for you having a full crop is very strong. And basically, when we take the old canes out in July and we bring up the new Primocanes, which the blackberry plant has a unique system of having a crown in the ground that lives for many years, whereas the upper part of the plant, we call them canes, which fruit, that part of the plant is a biennial. It will fruit, and then the following year it will die. And that's what we're showing you here. These are plants because we suppressed the Primocane development in these until about the middle of June. And at the middle of June, we quit suppressing and cutting those Primocanes that were coming up because they intertwine with the Floricanes that have all the fruit. So today, you're seeing the latter part of our training season on blackberries. And just to give you some highlights, this is one that hasn't grown much, but the first thing we do when we take the old canes out is if our Primocanes have now reached the height where we would like it, we simply come in and easily go around a little branch like this with a simple tie. This is a 8 mil plastic thickness, rather strong. It'll last 2 years. So I'm going around this real small branch here just to bring it up, just to give it a little guidance. I could have waited for another week, but that's one way that we start them. This one is absolutely too short. But once we tie that, when the plant is growing properly with sufficient growth, what we find is we develop into what you see right here. Now, this is the upper cane to reach the 60-inch height. Notice we cut it here just like I demonstrated over here, and that little branch, after a week or 2 or 3, now here it is here, over 2 feet long. Here's a branch here over 2 feet long. I have taken out, as you can see right where my finger is, any other shoots which we do not need. We want 2 branches, one each direction, as you see here. And anything that pops out, we simply eliminate it to reduce the competition so these will grow. And if you notice, we manage this system with 2 canes. 1 cane to the top wire, 1 cane to the bottom wire. And here's an example where the second cane is doing quite well. It's been tied twice, so we're still in what we call kind of a stage 3 development. But you notice it's running all along here, all the way, and here's the other branch coming toward us. And sometimes people say, well, I get kind of mixed up on which cane is which because now I've got 2 canes here. All you have to remember is look at the terminal part of the cane. It tells you which direction it's growing, and if it's growing this way, it has to be attached to this plant. Same way with this one. This one right here, is growing this direction, so it has to be. And then all we do when they meet each other, which is kind of a neat way of calling it, this can begin what we would call a stage 4. And a stage 4 is where they've made sufficient growth that now with one tie, I can tie these two terminals together and they will continue to grow quite nicely. And then when they get just like that, we'll continue the next time we're in a week or two. This shoot right here will need an additional tie. This one right here will need an additional tie. But when these shoots grow past the upright, not the small cane, the tall cane, when this grows past to about here, we'll cut it back to about here and we tie it right there. That will allow it, once we've done that, but you don't want to cut something this tender. You want this one, this right here, to be about to this distance, 6-12 inches past this, and then we cut it about 6 inches here. That's to keep this cane rather open, because late in the season, if we've already filled out our wire, we will let some of these little shoots start developing and they may come out. But we don't leave any shoots here until this wire is filled out. But what we're doing here today is showing you as you can walk down this road and you can see 3 or 4 different stages of growth, because these plants are different. They're not all the same. They're not all as healthy as one next to the next one. And it takes a little, before you start cutting, and I've helped people many times, don't just walk up and start cutting. You mentally look at what's there, then you determine if you need to tie. Then you look at the plant and see anything that's a basal sprout. You have to reduce those down. Now normally you can rub these sprouts off. Now why do we do that? We do that because anything that's growing in this basal area down here, any of this material, is competing with the shoots up here. And keep in mind, like right here where I'm pointing, each one of those leaves is attached to that stem at an area we call a node, and that node next year is going to produce a little fruiting shoot that will come out and cascade down where you can just put your hands right up under it and pick the fruit. Quite easy. But in order to get as much possible growth out of these as we can, we take off anything that's not going to be a productive type shoot or that where support's not needed. So what I do is I come in here and I simply cut these off. Now, we have irrigation in here, so I have to watch carefully and not cut my irrigation line. I'd rather my irrigation line be on the surface, but the irrigation line's right here. So what I do is I simply come in. Now, sometimes I can just break these off. If they're tender, even though they're thorny, they don't hurt you. And you can just break them off just like that. And sometimes that's faster than trying to do it with your hand shear. Now, that's a clean, that's called a crown. That crown, you're looking at a plant here, that crown is 20 years old in this planting. 20 years old. That's pretty old for a blackberry. Blackberries normally, I would say in the commercial world, they live about 4 to 6 years, and they're most commonly then taken out. Either diseases or something else takes them out, and they're replanted with new plants. We have not replanted this one, and part of this planting is 22 years old. Now, that's by not having to replant it, you save a lot of money. Granted, we're doing a lot of labor here, a lot of work, but you're fine-tuning this plant so that next year the harvest in here is so easy, it's unbelievable. And the fruit quality is outstanding. And for gardeners and even for some commercial people, this is one of the approaches that you can take and enjoy what you're doing. You know, you're outside, you can enjoy this, and next May, June, and early July, you've produced some wonderful fruit that are great, and these do produce quite nicely. We found that some people say, well, don't cut them this time of year because we're approaching frost. It has been our experience in doing the process that we're doing here after about 15 to 20 years, this blackberry is pretty tough. And freezing temperatures seldom ever in this area have cut into our crop potential. Now, granted, if we have one of those really, really late freezes, they call them a blueberry freeze, where they've begun blooming, it can reduce the crop. Yes, it can. But generally speaking, this is one of the tougher crops to come through late freezes and be resilient and produce a lot of fruit. Again, working with the Kiowa thorny blackberry, one of the things that we try to do in this TPUPS system is fill these wires out with canopy. Here's a good example of one we started. We put one tie on it, and that was the beginning of stage 3. Then we let it grow, and that was all toward now. If we make a final cut here, that's at the beginning of stage 4, as we call it. But I'll show you basically what we'll do. We lost a plant right here, or well, we've got a small plant, and notice this branch going to the south is all the way down. So all we simply do right here, very simply, is take our little marking pin off, and I'm simply going to take, this is so succulent, it is growing like all get out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that little twist, run it right there, make it just like that, break this off, bring this around just like that. If you can see that we're not squeezing them, we're not trying to crush anything, we're just tying them. So as this continues growth, the chances are good before we have a freeze, this one will be all the way down here. Blackberries grow, when you grow them like this, these branches grow fast. They move out, and this is a fairly healthy plant, so that's what I'd anticipate. But if you notice, this one doesn't have any branches back here. Sometimes they'll start developing little branches here. We take those out to make it grow its normal distance, and I'm going to show you that and what we do when we get an entire branch the way we want it. This one, if we had another big plant here, that other big plant would be crossing it right here, and we'd be tying the two together like we did over here. But on this branch, let me show you, it's reached that stage, and that stage is, again, remember what I said, here's your terminal. You know, this branch is from this plant right here, not from this plant. So if I lift this up, then you can probably see what we've got right here is mature tissue. So I come back about 6 inches right here, and I cut that off and I bring it out. I want this branch on this plant to produce little side shoots, which it's capable of doing. But if I cut into this little tissue like this, it won't produce any side shoots here. They will all be produced back here. So by letting this portion mature and letting it get that far, and then I cut it off, it gives you some good side branching here, which multiplies the number of buds you have to produce fruit. This is the one that's growing the other direction. Now, I don't try to pull it too terribly tight, I'll break it off. So I simply pull and I feel how much pressure I can use on it. I go around this so it won't slide, and then this is not a very big branch, but it's the branch that's going to the north this way. So I don't try to necessarily tie it to the wire. I just want to bring it around, and then when it gets out here, then we can tie it to the wire. But that's what you, now the other thing you do, very, very simply, is we've got one shoot left right here. We simply take that shoot off because I don't want any shoots going here. I want all that energy going into the north branch and the south branch. The old way of handling blackberries was to prune them in the dead of winter. fight those old canes all intertwined with the new Primocanes. It was a mess. So doing what we're doing now means come spring, we're basically through. We're ready to crop, and that helps immensely. Now, there are currently varieties available from Arkansas and some other areas that we have, and they're called Primocane fruiting. And that means if you planted that plant and it produces a Primocane this coming year in 2023, that Primocane would fruit the first year, at the very end of the year. Then the following year, the top portion would fruit. The following year in 2024, that same cane is fruiting twice. It will produce a bigger crop than what you would have with the first one. So that's the one called Traveler out of Arkansas. That's a good example of one. But here is a situation where sometimes people call me and say, I've got this blackberry that's fruiting now in September. Well, look at this one. This is a blackberry that's fruiting. See the size of some of this fruit? They get a lot bigger than that. They get about twice that big. But what you have here is fruit, and this is a good example of what you've got. And they will get, that's probably about 8 or 9 grams. They will get up to about 10 to 12 grams at least, and that's pretty good size fruit. But if you think this one's going to do this same thing next year, you may be sadly mistaken, because I've tried a number of them and I've seen them fruit like this. Then I'd take wood off of that plant and try to get it to do the same thing the following year, and it would revert back to its typical floricane fruiting system. The floricane being the 2-year-old cane, and it's of interest, but it's not something you can count on. Notice this one's fruiting; these two aren't. Question is, will this survive? Is it now really just a late floricane, or is it a crazy Primocane that's out of sync? Look at this one. This is one going to the south. So where is it coming from? Well, it's coming off of this plant right here. It's almost to the point of here, and when it gets this color, that's where we cut. So in about another week, all I would do today, if I were walking through this was my chore today, I would simply come in here, and in this case, you can simply take that simple tie, just like that, keep it so that the wind doesn't blow it and mess it up. Now, the next step you would do is when this gets here in about a week, you cut it off right there, and you're home free. You've got a fruiting system beautifully. Now, you let this one that's from this plant keep coming this way. So what do? Just to make sure the wind doesn't mess it up, we simply come in here and we again secure it very lightly, not a big problem, and that's done. Now, we would do the same thing. Look at these. This is one coming from this plant. This one is coming from this plant. Now, here's a good example. See these little shoots right here? That's what we want. But we don't want those little shoots on our branches until those branches reach all the way across, just like I'm showing you. So we simply cut them off. That puts the energy in here. This keeps going. And all we have to do is, just like you see right here, work it around those leaves without having to tie so many leaves in a bunch. Just like that. And once we do that, this is essentially, if we were to shut down right now and it was cold tomorrow, we've already got a nice wire covered with fruiting canopy, and it works great. So we've got the northbound branch. Here is the southbound branch, and we're going to do the same thing on it. Now, you say, well, when this branch reaches what? When it reaches this one, or when it reaches this one, when this branch reaches the tall branch, it's got to go past here and then cut it back to here. Don't worry about any of that low stuff. These are the low branches, but you always use the upper cane to keep it where you want it. And that's, we're walking along here doing our service. Now, the only thing I haven't done is to reach down here. I can take my finger, although that's thorny, and break that little bud off. Now, if I need to, I can cut some of these, and that's all I do. Again, this is directing the growth into the area, the canopy that's going to produce your fruit. And that's basically what you got. This is look coming here. This one's not going to take long. It's going to be right here. We're going to be cutting it right there. And when you do that, this is one of, my goodness, there must be 10 to 15 different trellis systems that people across the U.S. use on blackberries. And what you want to do is pick one that you're happy with, that gives you the maximum quality and amount of fruit. And we're simply displaying the TPUPS system as one that can be very kind to gardeners. It takes a little extra. It takes those 6 to 12, 15 plants in your backyard or in your garden to produce a lot of fruit. When these canopy like this, it's quite easy for these plants to produce 12 to 15 pounds per plant. Now, if you wanted to go the commercial route and express that in how much per acre, you're between 8,000 and 11,000 pounds of fruit. That's a lot of blackberries.